Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is your Talk Architecture podcast host, Naziati Muhammad Yaakob, who would like to bring on a special edition with regard to mental health for architects and other building professionals. This is a special 1 hour long marathon talk about stress versus burnout and how to tell them apart. Now, in my investigation on mental health for architects, in which I run a program to assist architects to rid of stress and burnout and fix it, this is a real special podcast to explain about my research on this area of stress and burnout. And there is a difference. So it is good for the individual to understand about the difference because in mental health, not knowing certain keywords, not knowing the understanding and the terminology of the words, just brushing them aside and saying, I don't feel good, but pinpointing the exact word which is research in medical journals. So I'm helping you guys out there to understand this further. Now, any human being that is having to work in industry, self-employed, or working in a company would undergo some sort of stress because you go out there and you interact with other people. There is a hierarchy going on. Someone who is your boss, and maybe you're the boss, and you could have stress and burnout as well. And in our profession, the architecture profession, we were trained as early as possible in architecture school to cope with stress. And I'm concerned there are questions that I ask with this issue that needs to be deliberated and discussed further. The questions that I ask is, did architecture school started the stressful situation and the long-term burnout problems? Did it start in architecture school? The whole thing about expectations, the whole thing about why am I not in delight with architecture when I'm a senior architect, for example? Why am I not seeing happiness? Is it just a drudgery? Is architecture just something that you purposefully need to please the client because you need to bring in the income because you're running a business? Could you have some fun with it? I'm sure there are architectural company directors, or senior members of the architectural profession that says, no, of course not. We try to enjoy architecture. But can you just give me an honest answer? Could we just have an honest debate? Could we really get deep into this topic? And that's what I want to do with this article, medically reviewed by Vera Saripalli, I think a psychiatrist, and also by Hope Gillette, which is a co-author or the author, on May 19, 2022, at the psychcentral1word.com on stress and burnout, how to tell them apart. Now, stress is a natural response to everyday or extraordinary stresses. You get stressed, and it's kind of something that is necessary sometimes so that you can do something and not just sit around. So sometimes it can linger for a while and then it becomes chronic. And this may lead to burnout, but not always. So stress happens, but burnout may not happen because it needs to be chronic before it becomes burnout. You felt stress before, but this sense of exhaustion when you have a burnout is a sense of exhaustion. It is also additionally have brain fog and lack of motivation seems to be going for a while now is this chronic stress or burnout. So there's also the issue of whether it's chronic stress or burnout. Not just about stress. So stress happens, but at this point, is it chronic stress or burnout? It could be both. To address it properly, it may be a good idea to understand the similarities and differences between stressed and burnout. Are you stressed or burnout? Stress versus distress. Not de-stress, but distress. Distress. Stress refers to your body's natural ability to respond to internal or external pressures. Its purpose is to prepare you for challenges, both negative and positive. Stress isn't necessarily a negative reaction. In many instances, it's referred to as eustress, and it is spelled like this, EUSTRESS. And it can help you become alert and achieve your goals. Now, we have that in architecture school, right? Because the looming pending project deadline, we get a bit stressed and alert, and we achieve our goals by finishing it. Okay, it can lead you to focus. In other cases, the stress response leads you to feel overwhelmed and unable to cope, and it's referred to as distress. Yeah, sometimes I remembered when I gave up actually and came out with a poor design. Yeah, distress. What causes you to experience one or the other depends on many factors, including how you interpret the sensor, your emotional resources, and the potential for support. For example, the same deadline that helps someone focus can lead someone else to freeze and experience anxiety. Correct. The same amount of workload can motivate one person while distressing another one. It is some sort of skill, isn't it, to use it to motivate oneself. I guess if you don't have to think about other things, then you don't have to be so distressed. So this lead to the next paragraph or section. Chronic stress versus burnout. When you're exposed to persistent stresses, you may experience chronic stress, particularly if you're not managing your stress from the beginning. How do you manage your stress from the beginning? So we could be distressed and we could do something detrimental to our deadline goals. And that's it. We learn from that. But if we did not learn from the past mistakes, and so you get persistent stresses, but which you may experience chronic stress, particularly if you're not managing. So you did not manage your stress from the beginning by learning from the mistakes. You keep on always being stressed. So chronic stress refers to the stress response being activated for a long time or in a recurring way. Okay, so burnout is considered a form of prolonged distress. The concept was first measured by social psychologist Christina Maslach who defined it in 2003 as a response to long-term emotional and interpersonal stresses on the job. So long-term emotional and interpersonal stresses on the job. We decide to be an architect or going towards being one, and we have a lot of challenges where there are expectations by our tutors and emotions get in the way, and we have problems relating to others maybe as well. So it's a form of distress because we didn't learn from the mistakes before. We couldn't figure out why we did not do well in our design or deadlines, which we did before. So I had a situation where I had to relearn construction because I was not learning from my previous mistakes. If I never actually ever learned it properly or decide to learn from my mistakes, I would continue doing mistakes and people would not appreciate what my product or the things that I do. So these are the added stresses that I would find. I'm just trying to figure this out in terms of the architect or the architectural student. Since then, research has found that burnout isn't only related to stress in the workplace, it can apply to many areas of life where prolonged stresses are present. So stresses like people's expectations, parents or tutors, or not getting the grades that one get, or the perception that one is not good enough, are stresses. So it's not only at the workplace. Just say I got a job and I still haven't learned my mistakes, and then sometimes the imposter syndrome sets in where I think I can do it, but I don't really. I've had a situation before where I thought I was good enough. Well, this is in terms of people's expectations. So they told me that I could do better. So they asked me to be working there. And that's sort of a big thing to me. That thing was a big thing that happened to me. I decided to work elsewhere, but it's lingered, and eventually I forgot about it. But I think I channeled it away to another expression. So it's how you manage stress or stresses in your life. So I could have gotten more burnout, I think, when reflecting on this in my life. Okay, there's a quote here. It is most common in high-stress jobs that require constant vigilance and decision-making, says Dr. Jessica Mizak, a licensed psychologist in Memphis. Burnout can also occur in teaching and social work, and autistic burnout is increasingly being recognized to be due to masking and sensory overwhelm. I see. I was in teaching, and I guess teaching in a university compared to teaching in a school is two different things. But there is that decision making that one has to do. And one is, when the students are around in the semester, it is a lot of decision making has to be done. So experiencing chronic stress, however, doesn't always mean you're experiencing burnout. Here's how to know whether it's chronic stress or burnout. So here we go. This is getting more interesting, don't you think? So this topic is similarities. Because burnout is a form of negative stress, it shares some of its main signs and symptoms. Chronic stress and burnout can have physical effects such as headaches, changes in sleep patterns, body aches and pains, fatigue, heart palpitations, shortness of breath, constipation or diarrhea, muscle tension, sexual dysfunction, low sex drive, weakened immune system. Emotional and mental effects can include anxiety, depression, lack of motivation, irritability, trouble concentrating, difficulty learning, forgetfulness, crying spells, and low impulse control. Now, those are the similarities between chronic stress and burnout. Okay? So, the differences are here. In a 2016 research review suggests burnout isn't necessarily separate from chronic stress, but rather the far end of the stress continuum. So they are parallel to each other, chronic stress and burnout, because they have these similarities, but burnout is the far end of the stress continuum. In other words, when chronic stress leads you to experience more intense and severe symptoms, and it impairs your ability to function, it's called burnout. So at one point they are parallel, but when it goes over the edge, is when you are impaired and there is a functional aspect of your impairment. You can't just, it doesn't work. You don't work anymore. You can't work anymore. Meaning, it just doesn't, it just fizzle out. That's why you have this match, which is burned, like a burnout, that describes burnout. Anyway, the same review indicated that a majority of examined burnout scales cited high levels of exhaustion, physical and mental, as the primary difference between burnout and stress. I can imagine that at one point or another I may have burnout symptoms. But did I couldn't function. I didn't recall not able to function. I did recall being chronically stressed. Yeah. It is kind of tragic in a way that one cannot function and totally burnout. It's such a bad situation. Totally exhausted. Come to the limit of one's capabilities and then just poof, you can't function. I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes you get so tired that you can't function. It's also burnout in a way, but the next day you can function back, or a few days later you'll be able to function again. But there are cases where people just can't function anymore and they need to get out of the situation. So it continues here that in addition, the authors of the review identified three main features of burnout. 1, overwhelming exhaustion. 2, cynicism and detachment from the job or task. 3, sense of not being productive, accomplished, or effective. Now, I can imagine that someone with impaired ability to function, normally they would function well in that environment, but because they need to still have the job, because the job pays their rent and their mortgages, though they're exhausted, they just go on and do the job, and they develop cynicism and a sense of detachment. So if you are working with someone who is totally exhausted and seems detached and is always cynical, that person sort of become isolated in a way in your eyes or in the eyes of the other colleagues, because they seem not to be able to be functioning as they perceive that person to function before. And then a sense of not being productive, accomplished, or effective. So that person feel that they're not able to accomplish anything and not being effective. I suppose in a situation, it's complex, you see. I can't really give my example as an example for everyone, but having experienced a situation of isolation, was I burnt out? I mean, I was trying to figure out whether I was burnt out. The cynicism, I was still being productive. I think it's quite complex, because it's not just one thing that one feels hard done by. It could be other things. A job is there's a lot of emotion invested in jobs, actually. Office is an environment where you are emotionally involved with. I don't agree with people saying that, they criticize a colleague for being too emotional because the colleague says, oh my God, they're being frustrated about something, they expressed it, and the other colleague would say, oh, you're too emotional. I think I disagree with that, because expressing oneself, what one concerns, is important. And of course the colleague would just walk away or don't want to deal with the situation. But that's not necessarily burnout. That's just an expression. But burnout happens when it's like you're getting stressed all the time, and then you're getting a chronic stress situation, and the situation drives you over the edge. I think that it's not fair if you're going to blame only on the person who is burnout. I mean, it's very complex. So the situation drives them over the edge and they become cynical. But, yeah, there are things that could indicate whether you're not being productive by evaluation by other members. It doesn't help that you could be in a situation where you are being bullied or harassed. Reading this article is just state whatever it needs to state, but when I try to find case studies in my mind about situations that not necessarily the fault lies in the person who is experiencing burnout, they may feel isolated by what's happening in the workplace. So I like to continue this because this needs to be finished as soon as it can. So, for example, low work engagement, like feeling detached from a purpose and disinterested in your job, may point towards burnout and not stress. Okay, it's a point of giving up. I don't think I ever got burnout in the sense that I'm always interested. I'm purposeful with regard to architecture education, and I'm never disinterested. I'm always interested, even though there's a lot of stress. So there are people who are experiencing burnout, and burnout can be impairing. Quote, experiencing these reactions can create a downward spiral of despair and emotional turmoil, says Dr. Mary Ann V. Mercer, a psychologist and author out of Barrington, Illinois. It's like a snowball rolling downhill, picking up more snow at velocity until it finally smacks into a tree at the bottom of the hill. She adds, this is not to be taken lightly, and it's not just a grin and bear type of situation. But that's very tragic in that case, like if the psychologists give that analogy of a downward spiral of despair and emotional turmoil, it can lead to a deep depression. A burnout is so serious that it's just at the edge, and if it's falling over the edge, it can fall down into the abyss. And this is what the psychologists and psychiatrists are saying here. So I still can continue a bit more. 3 tips to manage stress. If burnout is at the far end of the stress spectrum, the sooner you find ways to manage acute stress, the less likely you may experience chronic stress or burnout. Okay, there's something called acute stress. That is not just stress, but acute, and it's before chronic stress and burnout. To better manage your reaction to significant stresses, consider these tips. Try emergency stress busters. To help manage acute stress or stress you need immediately respite from, try practicing grounding exercises, taking focused deep breaths, practicing relaxation techniques on a regular basis, taking a break from the situation, going for a walk, cuddling with your pet, listening to relaxing music, taking a night to sleep on it. Yeah, this is the emergency one. Additionally, they write down here, consider positive self-talk. Positive self-talk can lead to decreased levels of stress by improving and strengthening your coping skills. Negative self-talk can reinforce stress by leading to low self-worth. Positive self-talk can be about changing and I am so worthless to I'm new at this and I'm learning. In other words, challenging negative self-talk may be the first step. Excuse me. Try setting boundaries. Personal boundaries can protect you from unnecessary stress exposure by indicating upfront what lines can and can be crossed. If, for example, you cannot stay late at work or have a coffee chat with friends because you need to pick up your children, saying this from the get-go can make these instances more manageable. 4 tips to cope with burnout. Experiencing burnout isn't your fault. It doesn't mean you did or didn't do something to prevent feeling this way, is what I said. If you've been exposed to significant stresses, the stresses could be anything, some nagging bosses or unsympathetic or bullying and harassment by your colleagues. So these are significant stresses. And haven't had the emotional resources to cope, it's natural that some of your symptoms may intensify. If you feel as though you already hit the limit on your stress continuum, coping is still possible. Try to focus on solutions. Mercer suggests taking a solution-based approach when you're feeling beyond overwhelm. You can ask yourself, what can I do exactly to solve this, as opposed to focusing on how you feel or the things you feel are challenging to do at the moment. Mercer says people who focus on solutions are often optimistic. This may help them manage stress. Focusing on how you can manage burnout may also make you feel empowered and that there's a way out. Well, I would like to say that I have the program on, which is a solution-based approach with the 3 pillars. And it's like a call to action that you need to do when you're feeling beyond overwhelmed, is what it says here. And you want to get help, basically. Because in the program, I not only be with you every week, I listen to you for an hour and assist with your weekly situation. And analyzing your situation and giving you feedback like a mirror, like what a friend should do for another friend. It's not easy sometimes talking to yourself or having a self-talk. You could actually get someone to listen to you, and someone who knows knows the solution or the technique or methods for you to solve the problem, because the problem can be very complex, even to do with your life problems. So next paragraph is making time for yourself may help. This is a part of the program. Burnout is a result of prolonged and persistent exposure to a stressor. You may need to create distance between you and said stressor. This may not always be possible. If the stressor is your job, it's natural that you cannot just pick up and go, but distance can also be emotional and mental. Muzak suggests taking the time to do things for you. It's important to take time for yourself and do things that make you happy. She advises this might involve taking a break from work, spending time with family and friends, or learning a new hobby. Creating and honoring strict boundaries may also help. If you're experiencing job-related burnout, consider leaving work at work once you get home. Try to celebrate your achievement. This is very important, actually. Pessimism is often an effect of burnout. Nobody's going to celebrate your achievement. You've got to, at one time or another, you kind of feel lonely because if people don't want to have anything to do with you, then you have to celebrate your own achievements. So pessimism is often an effect of burnout, says Mercer. She recommends focusing on your progress and achievements whenever you feel overwhelmed. The little bit of gains or wins, you gotta write down these things before you go to sleep so that you can sleep better, for example, in a journal. Consider writing down your accomplishment, correct? It's a list, and refer to this list when you need some perspective. When you read your list, you're bound to feel excited and importantly wonder how you doubted yourself in the first place, she says. Because burnout can lead you to feel not being productive or good at what you do. Assessing these thoughts can have an impact on your mood. Asking for support is key. Facing your stresses can be hard enough. Doing by yourself it can become overwhelming. Doing so by yourself can become overwhelming and lead to burnout. If you're feeling like stress is turning into something else, consider asking for help whenever and however you can. Speaking with managers and trusted colleagues about how you feel can help, as well as coming up with ways they can support you with deadlines, projects, and time off. Partners, family members, and friends can also give you a hand when feeling burned out. They can help you get groceries, pick up children at school, give you a hand with chores. Yeah, that's a straightforward one. The idea that you feel supported in some areas of your life where you figure out how to champion your dominant stresses. Speaking with a mental health professional is also highly advisable when you experience burnout. The stigma around mental health is a problem when people keep on skipping and trying to resolve on their own when they really need a mental health professional. They can help you develop a new coping skills and help you explore ways to actively solve the problem. Having a safe space to vent can also be a healing experience. So let's recap. The difference between stress and burnout may be the intensity of the symptoms you experience. Feeling burned out may mean you're physically and mentally exhausted, lack motivation, experience mental confusion, and have a sense of being unproductive. Now, these are the symptoms of burnout. physically you're not up to it, mentally it's just, it's not as great as before. Sometimes we underestimate what we're going through, and it's actually burnout. Going towards burnout or burnout itself. This thing's difficult to gauge. Different individuals, different situation. So managing stress early, taking time away from sources of prolonged stress, and speaking with supportive peers and professionals can all help you better cope with burnout down the road. Obviously, this is an article, and I try to inject some of my personal or some of my observations in general to the discourse, to this article. It's a good article, and knowing exactly what is stresses, what are acute stress, what's chronic stress, and what is burnout is the best that this article can do to explain. Is very helpful. So, but this is what the article can do. As an individual, there are ways and means to call to action and sort yourself out, because you're going beyond just stress, acute stress situation. There is a point in time where you need to help yourself when there's acute stress happening. And this is so important. So I just put it out there, reading this article and trying to make sense of this issue of stress and burnout and difference and similarities between these two words. So I hope that helps you in the context of a built environment professional and architects. Not going so much into it, but I will do so in many other episodes in the future. This is just to relate to this article in a lighter way rather than going to it in it so deeply. So thank you for listening to this podcast.